design is a very recent discipline, and design for sustainability is even more recent. It moved its first steps a few decades ago. And since then, it changed a lot. It evolved in many different ways, enlarging the scope of action from single products to large socio-technical system changes. So what I'd like to do in this presentation is really to provide an overview of how this change took place. So an overview of how design for sustainability evolved in the past decades, to see the different design for sustainability approaches that have been developed. And then I'll put forward a framework which tries to synthesize the combination of these approaches, that tries to provide an overview of the complexity of the design for sustainability field, and the framework which aims at showing the complementarities, linkages, and overlaps between different approaches to sustainability. So what I'm going to present today is the result of the work I've been doing together with Ulrike Zwilozoy. We have been working on these over the past couple of years. As Stefania said, she's connected now, and then she will give a presentation on one specific sustainability approach, which is related to transitions. So let's start. And well, when talking about the history of design for sustainability, I think we must start from Victor Papanek. And his book, Design for the Real World, can really be considered as the seminal work in introducing environmental concerns into the design world. It was published in 1971, I think, after being rejected 12 times, if I'm correctly remember. And in that book, it really provided a very strong critique to the design profession, highlighting the linkages between design and consumerism, and of course the implications in terms of ecological and social damage. And it's a book in which Papanek tried to advocate for a change in the design, not only in terms of design output, but especially in terms of the design profession. So he advocated for this large and profound transformation in the way in which designers operate. However, the pickup has been slow, actually very slow. So 20 years after the publication of this book, another book was published entitled Green Design, published by the British Council. And this can be considered as the starting point of a wider interest in design for sustainability. And green design can be considered as probably the first design for sustainability approach. The problem is that despite the fact that Papanek advocated for this large and wide transformation in design, green design is actually quite narrow, because basically it focuses on incrementally improving products through redesigning individual aspects of products. So essentially we're talking about changing materials, recyclable and recycled materials, optimizing material content, facilitating disassembly, optimizing the efficiency of products. So very narrow interventions on specific aspects of products. And here we can see an example of how this has been applied to a bench, which has been simply redesigned using recyclable materials. So don't get me wrong, there are some principles developed within green design that are still valid today and still important. But the key weakness of these is that it lacks a sort of life cycle perspective. And it's because of that that on the late 90s, green design has been replaced by eco-design. And the main difference and strength of eco-design over green design is actually this adoption of a life cycle approach and life cycle thinking. So essentially here we are talking about improving the environmental qualities of products by intervening systematically on the different life cycle stages, from the extraction of material to manufacturing, disposal, use, and distribution as well. It's interesting to note that the development of eco-design took place hand-to-hand with the development of life cycle assessment. So this allowed designers to prioritize intervention, to compare different concept alternatives, and also to quantify the improvement of their design solutions. We can see here an example of how eco-design has been applied. In the 90s, this is a project by Ursula Tischner. It's a refrigerator which tries to incorporate different eco-design principles. For example, it's designed to be placed beside the external wall of a house in order to exploit the cold outside air to cool down the chambers of the refrigerator. It also has a modular design to allow the cooling system to be quickly separated from the chambers in case of repair and maintenance. And it's also interesting in terms of material selection. For example, the insulation is done with cork instead of polymeric foams. So at the moment, in terms of eco-design methods and tools, we can say that we have a pretty much complete toolbox. We know how to design product using an eco-design approach. There are still some research that has to be completed, but the fundamentals in terms of eco-design practice are there. In parallel with eco-design, another approach has been developed in the early years of 2000, which is a cradle-to-cradle approach. I'm not going to spend too much words here because it's very much linked to the circular economy framework, so using of restorative and regenerative approaches and the waste equal food principles and the development of different flows in terms of biological materials and technical materials. What I want to say is that from a product design point of view, this approach has been very powerful in terms of changing the mindset of companies and designers. So it's a very catchy term. From a content point of view, my personal opinion is that eco-design is much more complete in terms of providing a principle and tools to designer to operate at the product design level. In the cradle-to-cradle approach, there is a strong emphasis on material flows, but a bit of lack of emphasis on the energy aspects. This is resolved here by saying that we should rely on renewable energies. But the practical implications of that, from a design point of view, is that in most of the cases designers don't focus much on the energy-related aspect. And this is a problem considering that there are several products whose environmental impact is very much related to the amount of energy consumed in the different life cycle stages. And here we can see an example of how cradle-to-cradle has been applied. Is a series of shoes developed by Nike. Here the idea is to use a range of natural materials, cotton, hemp, and also the idea of facilitating the replacement of some components to support recycling. So for example, the outer sole is designed with an interlocking system, avoiding the use of glue in order to facilitate repair and recycling of materials. There is another nature-inspired approach developed around the late 90s, which has been labeled as biomimetics or biomimicry, which is, of course, about taking inspiration from nature in order to solve design problems. And in some cases, this can lead to more efficient solutions in terms of utilization of the use of materials and energy. Here we have an example of Lotusan, which is a paint used for external building, which has been developed, taking inspiration from the self-cleaning properties of lotus leaves. So all these three approaches, eco-design, cradle-to-cradle, and biomimetics, tries to address the problem of the environmental impact of products very much from a technical point of view. So they address different aspects of the product life cycle. However, the key fundamental weakness of these approaches is the lack of attention to the human-related aspect. And this is a big problem. For example, even if we can design products that can last very long, we know how to do that from a technical point of view, we need anyhow to acknowledge that some products are discarded even if they're still functioning properly. So this is the result not of a technical problem, but is the result of a failure in terms of product-user relationship, of the lack of a bond between the product and the user. So that's why in the middle of the 2000s, some design researchers started to explore this aspect, started to look into the emotional attachment between products and users, started to investigate the factors that can have an influence on that. So the first part of the research was aimed at understanding the product meanings that can affect emotional attachment. Self-expression, group affiliation, memories are examples of important product meanings that can enhance product attachment. And then several researchers have started developing guidelines to support designers. Here we can see an example of a product that embeds some motion and durable design principles. This is a lamp. When you buy it, it comes in this form, so the diffuser is covered by a sort of black layer, and with a tool you can remove parts of the black layer, essentially customizing the product, personalizing the product. So the result is a very unique product and a very personal product. And these are two aspects which are supposedly create a stronger and longer bond with the product. Another weakness of eco-design and cradle-to-cradle is that they don't focus much on the user behavior and user habits. And again, this is a big problem because for some product categories, the way in which product is used determines most of the environmental impact. So again, in order to fill this gap, some design researchers started to address this problem, trying to understand how to, building up from different behavioral change models, starting to investigate how designer could have a role in relation to influencing behavior change. So in terms of triggering people in abandon unsustainable behavior and take on board the sustainable behavior. Initially, this type of approach focused on products, but then it expanded on services, product service systems, and even on policy. So it's a very powerful approach that can be used transversally on many different applications. Here we can see a practical example of how design for behavior change has been applied to a product. It's a power cord called Power Aware, and essentially through a different combination of light patterns and intensities, it is supposed to communicate the amount of energy that different appliances consume when connected to this power cord. So overall, at a product design level, we can say we have a range of design for sustainability approach that can help us to design products. We have some approaches which focus more on the technical aspects, so eco-design, cradle-to-cradle in relation to material flow especially, and also bioinformatics. And then we have some human-centered product design approaches, looking at the attachment between the product and the user, and also how the product can influence user behavior. The problem is that this is not enough if we want to address the sustainability problem. So we discovered in the late 90s that under discussion there are not only artifacts, but also patterns of consumption and the way in which needs are fulfilled. So something that we discussed also with Alex in the previous presentation. So as Ehrenfeld said, reducing unsustainability will not create sustainability. So working only at the product level, of course it's fundamental, it's necessary, we have to do that, it's a must, but it's not enough in order to move towards a sustainable society. And it's because of this reason that several design researchers in the late 90s and early 2000s started to explore the role of design beyond developing individual products and towards solutions to influence habits and consumptions. And within this area, a concept that emerged as promising is the concept of product service systems. So nowadays there are other terms, circular business model, for example, but essentially it's pretty much a concept aligned with product service system. So we are talking about designing combination of products and services. We are talking about shifting from selling products to selling function and performance. We are talking about shifting from a consumption based on ownership to a consumption based on access and sharing. We can see here an example of that. River Simple, this is a British car manufacturer, electric car, but they are not planning to sell this car. This is going to be provided through a per-month agreement, fixed fee, which includes everything essentially. The use of the car, maintenance, repair, and also the energy consumed by the car. So this creates an interesting alignment between the economic and environmental interests, because the company will be economically interested in improving the efficiency of the car as much as possible, and also design long-lasting car. So that's the real benefit of product service system, this alignment between the environmental and the economic dimension. Or another example here in the business-to-business environment, Paperlook's solution from Philips, in which essentially they provide a service through which they are paid a fixed amount of money for providing a certain amount of looks to their customer. And even in this case, they keep the ownership of all the lighting equipment. So even here, in terms of design methods and tools, a lot of research projects, especially funded by the European Union, have been carried out in the beginning of the 2000s. So we have developed a fairly complete range of design tools. The research has also moved from understanding the environmental implication of the product service system to the socio-ethical aspects, and also the implication in terms of developing product service system in low-income context. But there is still research to be carried out. We've just completed a project exploring the interconnections between product service system and distributed economies, which is a very interesting way of looking at this, and Luca will present the result of that work in the afternoon. The sort of exploration of design researchers to look beyond the design of individual products also led to an approach which has been defined and labeled as systemic design. This was developed initially at Politecnico di Torino by Professor Bistagnino, and essentially combines industrial ecology, biomimicry, with an attention to the local territory. So essentially this approach aims at designing locally based productive system using different industrial ecology approaches. So you can see here some visualizations of a project they undertook, focusing on redesigning the coffee value chain. So here you can see the existing value chain and flow of materials and different stakeholders involved, and the waste produced at the different stages, and on the right the proposal of a new system in which waste are used locally as a resource by, for example, pharmaceutical companies and other stakeholders. What's interesting here, linking to what Alex said before, is that they also focus on looking not only at the flows of materials and resources, but also at the cultural and social available resources and at the local knowledge and skills. So they combine also this human layer into the design of these new local productive systems. And I think it's interesting now, well, it has been initially developed, I think, almost 20 years ago, but now the group at Politecnico di Milano is getting a lot of traction with several European projects focusing on implementing this approach in different sectors. And then there is another interesting approach which actually is quite different in the sense that if the previous approaches were mainly top-down, in the sense that there is a company behind those solutions, in this case we are talking mainly about bottom-up solutions. So here we recognize the role of individuals, the role of communities in developing by themselves solutions to address their own daily needs. So examples of these solutions that grown from the bottom-up, community gardens, co-housing solutions, community carpooling, community-based agriculture, neighborhood care solutions as this one that you can see on the screen. So essentially solutions in which the community, the individuals had a strong role. We often use the term creative community to highlight the inventiveness of these communities in solving, implementing and managing solutions. So design researchers have started almost 20 years ago to analyze all these cases of innovations that took place from the bottom, and also to try to understand the role of design, because in these cases the communities, the individuals are the designers. So what's for the designers? And an interesting way of looking at this is to see the designers as the professionals that can help to support these innovations, working with and for the communities, using a range of co-design and visualization skills to facilitate the process of designing social innovation, but also in terms of optimizing and scaling up social innovation. You can see here a picture of an interesting project called Creative Citizens. So it's a sort of lab implemented by Politecnico di Milano in the city of Milan, in collaboration with the local municipality, where citizens can gather, propose a range of problems, issues, and together work towards the co-designing of solutions to be implemented. So it's a different kind of design paradigm, if you like, compared to working with a company. And then more recently we understood the need of large-scale socio-technical changes and the need of implementing these changes in a short term. And design research at the moment is also focusing on these aspects. So I would say it's the cutting edge of the design research at the moment. The first 3 PhD were completed very recently, 7-8 years ago. Edith Gaziusoy, PhD, Peter Yore, 2000, and mine were related to this topic. So what we tried to do was to build upon insights from transition studies. Here you can see a very famous model from Giels, which summarized the way in which socio-technical regimes can change under the pressure of the landscape and under the pressure of niche socio-technical experimentations. But this is an approach that actually encompasses all the others. And because with socio-technical change, we are looking at a range of technical, social, organizational, and regulative changes. So we really need a combination of solutions which span from product service systems, social innovation, technical innovation, and other approaches as well. So here is very much, at least one way of looking at it, it's very much about facilitating the process of engaging with multiple stakeholders in envisioning new socio-technical systems and also co-designing the sort of socio-technical transition path to try to drive the process towards that vision. There are many practical projects in which design for sustainability transition has been applied. I'm sure Edith will provide more examples later, but this is a project in which she was involved with called Vision 2040. It was about developing visions of sustainable cities in Australia, looking at different aspects, mobility, food and energy. And it was really about working with a range of public and private stakeholders and developing understanding where to go and how to go. So what kind of steps in terms of small socio-technical experiments, what kind of changes at the policy level, and so on. So as I said, it's really much about facilitating this multi-stakeholder process. At the moment, the focus is also about developing a range of tools to support designers operating at this level. So you can see here an example of a tool developed at Brunel University to facilitate stakeholders in developing and designing this socio-technical transition path. So this is, in a nutshell, very quickly, what happened from a design for sustainability point of view, how the discipline has changed. So let's try now to make sense about what happened, and what I try to do is to put forward a framework that tries to summarize this evolution. So the first thing that we can say about what happened is that the scope of design has enlarged. So we started designing individual aspects of products, looking at the sustainability implication of that, and gradually we moved towards socio-technical systems. So we started from material. Green design is an example of an approach that addressed that aspect. So for example, I have a range of examples linked to automotive. This is what has been done, for example, by Ford, analyzing some of the component interiors and try to replace them with renewable and recyclable materials. Then we moved to the design of the entire product life cycle. An example of this in the 90s is the eco-basic car by Fiat, a concept which tries to reduce the impact of the car in the use stage, manufacturing, and disposal stage. So increasing complexity, increasing scope of design for sustainability. And then we discovered that designing products is not enough, so we moved towards product service system innovation. And an example of that is car sharing systems. So here, of course, the innovation is not on the technical aspect, but is on the way in which a mobility need is satisfied. Then the next level is what we call the spatial social level. So essentially focusing on human settlements and the conditions of the communities that live in those settlements. And an example related to mobility is these community carpooling platforms, which allows people living in the same neighborhood to share leads. So again, the innovation here is not on the technical aspect, it's not on the business model, it's really on trying to combine needs at a local level and optimize existing assets. So in this case, car lifts. And more recently, we moved, or we are trying to move in terms of understanding what design can do at the socio-technical system level. So in this case, we might talk about rethinking the mobility of a city, for example, moving towards ownerless mobility system focused on electric vehicles, for example. So this is the main transformation that took place in the design for sustainability community. So a shift, gradual enlargement in terms of scope of action. And this is summarized by this axis or dimension, if you like. So we move from insular to systemic design intervention. And this is also linked with the complexity of solutions, because with insular solutions, so for example, replacing the material of this chair, this is something that can be accomplished by the company itself. The company doesn't need any other actor. But if we gradually move to the right-hand side of the axis, we recognize the complexity of innovations. And of course, when we talk about socio-technical system change, we need to engage a broad range of stakeholders, companies, municipalities, communities, NGOs, policymakers, and so on. So it's something that cannot be managed by individual actors. It requires a collaborative effort. The other important dimension that characterizes design for sustainability is how the design problem has been framed. And there has been a sort of move or shift from technocentric approaches to human-centric approaches. So on one hand side, we have design intervention in which sustainability is mainly seen as a technical challenge. So we talk about improving efficiency, replacing materials, and so on. While on the other side, we have interventions and innovations in which user and people habits and behavior play a fundamental role. And we can see how it gradually moved from focusing on the human-centered aspect in terms of product-user interaction, towards consumption habits, the practices within communities, to move towards the dynamics of different stakeholders within socio-technical systems. So an enlargement in terms of complexity as well. So what we can do now is to combine these two axes on the different innovation level, and then we can try to map the different design for sustainability approaches. So we can start with green design. So in terms of scope, it's very much an insular approach, just focusing on individual aspects of products. In terms of framing of the design problem, it's a technocentric approach. Just look optimizing material, improving efficiency, and so on. So combining the positioning of the approach on the two axes, we can draw an area where the approach is placed. And we can do the same for the other approaches, and this is the result. There is, of course, a certain degree of subjectivity in this. We interacted with experts to decide where to place the different approaches, but of course we can debate on that. But I think what's important is actually the relative position of the different approaches. Because what we want to show with this framework is really how different approaches complement one another, how they overlap, and also the empty spaces in the framework. So just to give you some example, we can see how eco-design, cradle-to-cradle, emotionally durable design, and sustainable behavior complement each other. They address different problems from different angles at the product level. We can see, for example, how design for sustainable behavior span over different innovation levels. This is what is happening at the moment. It's being applied at the product, service, and even at the social innovation level. So we can have a sort of overview of the design for sustainability landscape. We can also try to understand what are the key characteristics of this evolution by adding a sort of color coding of the different approaches. This is linked to the year when the approach was developed. So the darker it is, the more recent the approach is. And we can really see what we've been discussing before. So we have this kind of shift in terms of scope from single products to complex systems. We have a shift from technocentric to human-centric approaches. So if we look here, all these approaches here are basically focusing on addressing sustainability from a technical point of view, looking at material flows, looking at efficiency at the product or at the territorial scale. The more we move to the top, the more important human-centered design becomes. So, for example, if we go up one step, motion durable design is focusing on the relationship between product and users, looking at the emotional bond between the two. And then moving up, we are talking about behavior, we are talking about consumption patterns, we are talking about sufficiency at a community level in social innovation, and then we're talking about complex socio-technical layout. So the human-centeredness becomes more and more important the more we move to the top of the frame. And then we can also see that there has been a shift from a narrow to a broader sustainability focus. So initially, the way in which we tried to address sustainability was mainly focusing on environmental aspects. So green design, eco-design are perfect examples of that. But the more we move to the right, the more the social aspects of sustainability becomes important. So even at a product service system level, we started from an environmental perspective, but we also investigated the implication in terms of social equity and cohesion. So we developed guidelines and tools to integrate these aspects into product service systems. Social innovation, by definition, looks at supporting communities, so it's very much a human-centered design activities in which the fulfilling of community needs becomes the focus, the central point. And this also leads to some considerations on the design skills that are required to adopt these approaches. And we can simplify a bit and we can say that at the moment, if you want to become an expert on design for sustainability, you need to specialize on a few of these approaches. And the approaches at the bottom of this framework mainly require technical knowledge and skills in terms of materials, in terms of production and manufacturing processes, in terms of renewable energy. And the more we move to the top, the more human-centered skills become important. So understanding how people perceive products, understanding emotions, understanding how to change and influence behavior, understanding how to co-design with people and other stakeholders becomes crucial. So we have two completely different sets of skills. We can also make some consideration about the importance of the different approaches. And we said in the beginning we need changes at the socio-technical system level, so that's a common understanding. But it would be a mistake to consider the approaches at the lower level less important. As we said before, when we look at socio-technical system changes, we refer to a combination of innovation, which includes new product service systems, and social innovation. And in any case, there would be a material elements to be designed. So this means that all the knowledge and skills related to how to design product becomes important and fundamental as well. So all these approaches, in my view, are equally important. They offer the opportunity to address sustainability challenges looking at different perspectives. So depending on the specific project, we might decide to select a combination of different approaches. What is interesting in my view about the design for sustainability transition approach is that, as I said before, is something that tries to encompass all the other approaches. So recognize the complexity of solution, the complexity of design, and the importance about tackling sustainability at the material, product, business model, and social innovation point of view. So, in summary, what time is it? So, in summary, what we try to do with this framework is really to showcase the richness of the design for sustainability landscape and to showcase how different approaches interact with one another. And we think this kind of framework could have potentially value from a research point of view. So it can be used to trigger the academic discourse on the past, present, and future of design for sustainability. It can also be used to map what's going on in terms of research, for example, in a particular country or in a particular sector. But of course, it's something that I would like then to discuss with you. And of course, we're here also to get feedback in order to try to understand how to improve this framework. At the educational level, it can probably also be used in terms of communicating to students the complexity and richness of design for sustainability. But also potentially to plan sustainability programs, for example, to understand at what level, at what era of the program we can teach different aspects of design for sustainability. And at design practice level, potentially can be used by companies and designers to navigate the complexity of design for sustainability, and maybe also as a potential audit tool to understand what the company is currently doing in terms of design for sustainability, in which area a company is operating. So this is something that is hypothetical at the moment, but is something that we would like to explore in future. So I'll conclude now with this slide. So if you want to go a little bit more in depth in relation to what I said, there are two publications, both in open access. There is a paper published a few years ago in which we initially proposed this framework, and then there is a book recently published with a new version of the framework in which we go a bit more into the details of different design approaches, looking also at the next research challenges in relation to the different approaches. Okay, thank you very much. I close here, and I'll give the floor, virtual floor, to Elio.